The other thing that was really tough about painted rocks was the risk of entanglement. So
Yes, I understand there was a pretty major mishap.
there absolutely was, man. Yeah. So when you're diving around a cliff face, there's a lot of rocks, because painted rocks has a very, it's a very popular site for anglers. There was a lot of discarded angling equipment. We've had anchors with anchor lines still attached that were kind of drifting around. A lot of trolling lines that get hung up on rocks and trees and other debris. So you break your line, what happens to it? It's still down there, right? So when you're piloting your ROV around, fishing line is such a risk of getting entangled in the thrusters and really jeopardizing the entirety of the project. Unfortunately, one of my ROVs did get entangled on some material down there. We haven't identified exactly what it got wrapped up on, but on several surveys we were doing, I'd be motoring along. I'd see something shiny out of the corner of the lens. I'd angle my camera to it, and sure enough, it's a big flasher for a trawling rig or a jig or some sort of fishing lure, and then trailing around it is a bunch of fishing lines. So when we're doing surveys at 180 feet just off the cliffs there, if that were to get tangled up at that depth, it would be really challenging to go down and recover it easily. So when we were second day of our dive survey, that's exactly what happened with my yellow ROV. We were just finishing up a survey. We were scanning the base of the cliffs for any artifacts that might have collected down there. And battery was kind of running low. So I'm like, we got just enough juice to get up to the surface. And, I've got an extra battery. We can finish our survey. So I'm coming up from about, 187 feet. And then it was going up just fine. Once it hit that 70-foot mark, it wasn't ascending anymore.
Oh, that's not good.
So it had got hung up on the bottom. So, after a couple attempts of just trying to navigate around, I'm like, oh, it's not coming loose. It's not coming loose. We just decided to pause our survey. I have a second ROV, which is equipped with a manipulator arm. So that's very useful for driving or diving down and taking the lure or line and kind of untangle it from any structure. So I'm like, okay, we're just going to deploy the second ROV. We're going to make a good recovery. So as soon as I kicked the blue ROV into the lake, about 30 feet down, the second most dreaded thing an ROV pilot could possibly imagine was a flood alert. So there's a sensor inside the electronics bay that can detect moisture. So there must have been a small little nick in one of the O-rings or something that was causing water to seep into the electronics bay. So rather than losing two ROVs, I made a quick surface with the Blue Rover, and unfortunately we weren't able to untangle the yellow ROV that day. The wind was picking up. It was getting a little bit choppy out on the water. So I made the call to abandon the yellow ROV, rushed home that day and worked all night trying to make sure that the O-rings were sealed, did a repressure test to make sure that the blue ROV was once again water resistant or watertight. And the next day we dropped the ROV down to see if we can make a recovery. Unfortunately, that second day, we weren't able to locate it effectively. We did find the remains of the tether. When the tether was lost over the side, we were able to follow that a ways. But at one point, somehow the tether was broken. So we were able to locate the reel and the controller. So we were able to make a recovery on that, but the yellow ROV itself was nowhere to be found. So burned up 3 whole batteries trying to track it down that day, again to no avail. So that was another night the yellow ROV was in the lake. So the third day, my dad and I, we rigged up a cutting implement for the blue ROV for the manipulator arm, so that we can dive down, we can cut the tether if it's tangled up on anything, and then use the manipulator arm to grab onto it and recover it. So on the third day, we were navigating around. Finally, we were able to find that trailing piece of tether, follow it to where the ROV was resting on the bottom of the cliffs, again, around that 180-foot mark. And there we were able to grab onto it and make a recovery. So right now, I pulled the ROV out. There was a little bit of water in the housing for the yellow ROV. So, had that stretched out, did all the drying out of all the electronics board. There's still a chance that it's salvageable. But the only way to really find out is if we get another controller and another tether in, just to make sure that that's all good to go. So there's definitely a lot to work out on this project, but it's still exciting. It's still a lot of fun.